Hi, fourth grade. This is Miss Kay, and we're on lesson 8 of our American Revolution unit. Today we're going to read a chapter called It's War. So here's your vocab. The first word is front, which is a noun, and that is the place where fighting happens in a war. Strategic is an adjective, and that is carefully planned to achieve a specific goal, such as winning a battle or finishing a project. Confront is a verb, and that is to challenge or to fight against something. Surrender is a verb, and that means to give up or to quit. Morale is a noun, and that is confidence or a level of enthusiasm one feels. Tactics is a noun, and those are ways used to achieve a goal. And then bleak is an adjective, which means depressing, grim, or bad. So our big question for chapter 5 says, at the beginning of the war between the British and the colonists, who seemed most likely to win the war and why? So think about who had the stronger army, who had more money, who had more power. Think about all those things we learned at the beginning of this unit. It's war. At the beginning of the war, the British were confident that they could defeat the colonists. The Continental Army, at least at first, was not exactly a force to be reckoned with. It was made up of farmers and shopkeepers. These soldiers knew how to shoot, but they didn't know how to march or fight in formation. They had almost no cannons and very few fighting ships. On the other hand, the British Army and Navy were among the largest and best trained in the world. The British had more soldiers, more cannons, and more ships, and they had much more experience. Besides that, the British had a plan that they thought would help them win the war. Divide the colonies in half and fight them on two fronts. This is a picture that says the commander of each regiment in the Continental Army read the Declaration of Independence to his troops. Crossing the Delaware. Having retreated from Boston, the British turned their attention to New York City. They recognized the strategic importance of this port city. If their plan to gain control was to succeed, they needed to capture it. However, George Washington was equally aware of the importance of having control of New York City. He marched his troops there to confront the British Army. In the summer of 1776, the British and Continental armies engaged in a battle on Long Island and Manhattan Island. George Washington and his men failed to keep New York City out of British hands. By November 1776, having lost New York City, George Washington retreated along the Hudson River and then into New Jersey. Washington knew his army was simply not as strong as the British army. If he tried to challenge the British in a major battle, he knew he would lose. He would have to look for opportunities to attack when his enemies were not expecting it. On December 25, 1776, that is exactly what Washington did. It was Christmas night, and the Hessian troops, who were camped in Trenton, New Jersey, had been on round-the-clock alert for over a week. They were exhausted. Finally, they had been allowed to sleep. Because they were not expecting an attack on Christmas night, many were unarmed. And this is a picture showing a painting which depicts the historic moment when George Washington led the Continental soldiers across the Delaware River to surprise the Hessian troops who were hired to fight for the British. So they are on their way to surprise attack on the British. Washington crossed the Delaware River from Pennsylvania and took the Hessians completely by surprise. More than 1,000 of them were forced to surrender in the sneak attack. The victory at Trenton was extremely good for the morale of Washington's troops, but it was followed by a string of defeats. Washington and his men were defeated at the Battle of Brandywine in September 1777, and again at the Battle of Germantown in October. At Germantown, some of the soldiers in the Continental Army became confused and fired on their own troops. Because of these defeats, the British were able to capture Philadelphia. The Continental Congress was forced to break up and relocate to another city. Farther north, a British army marched down from Canada, recaptured Fort Ticonderoga, and began to close in on the Continental Army fighting in this area. The Continental Army was in trouble. It was time to retreat and regroup. but the British were right behind them. So this is showing all that fighting going on. The British are trying to recapture things that they have lost. Outsmarting the enemy. The Continental Army also needed a plan. Fortunately, a man named, gotta see how to pronounce this, Tadeusz Kosciuszko. So he had a plan. Kosciuszko was a Polish engineer who had joined the colonists in their fight for independence. Kosciuszko shared certain strategies that the Continental Army might use to slow down the British Army. As Kosciuszko's suggestion, the Continental soldiers cut down trees and let them fall across roads as they retreated. They destroyed bridges and they built dams so rivers would overflow onto the roads. These tactics gave the soldiers time to set up defenses near Saratoga, New York. Kosciuszko played an important role in that too. He suggested the best defensive spots to build forts, thus preventing the British from continuing south to Albany. He also taught the Continental soldiers how to build strong defensive walls. In September 1777, the British attacked the forts near Saratoga. Despite repeated efforts, they were not able to break through the Continental Army defenses. On October 17th, the British general surrendered. More than 6,000 British soldiers handed over their weapons. The Battle of Saratoga was the first big victory for the Continental Army. In December 1777, Washington and his tired men limped into the Pennsylvania town of Valley Forge. Washington had decided that his army would spend the winter here. In those days, armies scaled back fighting during the winter. That winter, Washington's army had to face another enemy, Mother Nature. Mother Nature was not kind to the Continental Army during the winter of 1777 to 1778. It was a bitterly cold winter, and the soldiers were not prepared for it. Most of them did not have winter coats. Many did not even have shoes. Their injured feet left bloody footprints in the snow. And this is showing Washington riding through the camp at Valley Forge. During December and January, the soldiers cut down trees and used them to build log cabins. These cabins provided some shelter from the cold, but they were crowded and damp. There were other problems too. The soldiers did not have enough to eat. They had to survive for many weeks on fire cake, a tasteless mixture of flour and water baked over a fire. Occasionally, they might have a bowl of pepper pot soup, a thin broth made from beef and a handful of peppercorns. Clean drinking water was also in short supply. Many soldiers drank dirty water and got sick. A few died of frostbite or starvation. Many more died as a result of diseases. One army surgeon, Albigence Waldo from Connecticut, kept a diary during his time in Valley Forge. Here is an excerpt from his diary. December 14th, the army, which has been surprisingly healthy hitherto, now begins to grow sickly from the continued fatigues they have suffered this campaign. I am sick, discontented, and out of humor. Why are we sent here to starve and freeze? George Washington was worried about the state of the army. On December 23, 1777, he wrote a letter to the Continental Congress explaining that many of his men were in such poor health that they were no longer fit for combat. The situation was so bad, Washington wrote that he was worried that his men might give up and go home. And this is a note from George Washington. I am now convinced beyond a doubt that unless some great and capital change suddenly takes place, this army must inevitably be reduced to one or other of those three things: starve, dissolve, or disperse. We have no less than 2,898 men now in camp, unfit for duty because they are barefoot and otherwise naked. As the new year dawned in 1778, things looked bleak for George Washington and the Continental Army. However, the tide was beginning to turn in their favor. And this picture shows among Washington's men at Valley Forge was a young French nobleman named Marquis de Lafayette. Lafayette was to have a prominent role in the Revolutionary War. All right, your questions. Number 1, Is true or false? The British were confident they could defeat the colonists at the beginning of the war. Number 2, only trained soldiers fought in the Continental Army. True or false? Number 3, what was the British Army's strategy? Number 4, what is a front? Number 5, the British focused on blank because of its port. So what city were they looking at? Number 6, Washington and his army surprised the Hessians in Trenton by attacking on, what day did they attack them? Number 7, look at the pictures on page 42 and 43. Make an inference about George Washington and his army. So let's look at those pictures. All right, 42 is here, and 43. So looking at these pictures of George Washington's army, what is one inference you can make? One conclusion you can come to about the people that were fighting in the war? What are they like? Okay, number 10. Oh, nope. 8. The Battle of Blank is important because it was the first major victory of the Continental Army. So which city was the first big win for the colonists? Number 9, you're looking at page 45. And I want you to look for a detail that supports the idea that the soldiers were miserable that winter. So on this picture here, what might show that the soldiers were not happy during this time? All right, number 10, true or false? The winter weather was more dangerous to Washington's troops than the British Army. And number 11, besides their health, what was Washington worried his soldiers would do? All right, make sure to go back in the text to find those answers, and let's head over to skills. So first we're going to talk about the word morale, and that means confidence or the level of enthusiasm one feels. After losing the soccer game because their goalie was injured, the team's morale was low. So morale is how you feel about a certain situation, how much confidence you have about something. So you're going to choose whether these different things would lead to a low morale, so people not being very confident, or a high morale, people are excited, they're confident, they're ready to go. So number 1, Washington's troops had very little food during the freezing winter. Would that give them low morale or high morale? The coach announced that the team had earned a spot in the state championship. Number 3, after watching a video thanking them for their service, the soldiers felt good about the job they were doing. Low or high morale? Number 4, the company president announced that workers would be fired the following week. Number 5, after the play, the actors knew they had performed their best. So again, think about whether that situation would lead people to be positive and confident and happy about the situation, or the opposite. Okay, number 6, you're going to choose 2 of these groups of people that were involved in the British Parliament reacting to colonists' preparations by sending more soldiers to Boston. So when the British found out that Boston was getting ready for battle, they sent more soldiers to that area. So what 2 groups of people were involved in that? Choose the 1 person that was involved in a night rider traveling to warn colonists of the British plans. So who were those people that were warning them that the British were coming? Number 7, choose the 2 that were involved in the battles of Lexington and Concord. And then number 8, you're going to put all that information together to answer this writing prompt. So it says, no one knows who fired the first shot at the Battle of Lexington. If a stray shot had not been fired, do you think the Revolutionary War would have started? Explain what led to the first shots of the war. So first you can give your opinion. So I think or don't think. So tell me, do you think it would have started, or do you think it would not have started if that shot hadn't been fired? And then you're going to explain what led to those events. So the shot happened because blank. And then give me another reason. So 2 reasons that the shot was fired, that shot heard around the world. What caused that person, whoever it was, to fire that first shot that started the Revolutionary War? All right, that's it for today. Please make sure to use my sentence starters, use the text, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye, Adams.